For the techniques that helped me to escape paranoia. I'm having trouble pushing the right buttons in the right sequence. Do bear with me. Okay, here we go. This morning's lesson is drawn from a good-hearted question found on Reddit, which reads, "Recently, after my meditation practices, I have been experiencing fear and paranoia." The question continues. I grew up not trusting my parents, was physically and emotionally abused. I get the thought that my stepfather is there, and any noise I hear is him coming to hurt me. It gives me a wrenching feeling in my chest and an adrenaline rush. I guess my question is, will something like this pass? It's been happening more often. I've been looking at it like it's just feelings coming up from when I was younger that I've avoided. I've just been sitting with it until it passes. Oopsie. But it is extremely uncomfortable. I'm sober over a year from any drugs or alcohol. Mazel tov. Congratulations. So, let's begin with some broad brushstrokes. I do not have the intestinal fortitude to behave as a troll towards you. I do not wish to behave as a school of piranha in a Amazonian tributary and treat you like an unfortunate bovine who has wandered in. My goal here is not to defecate all over your self-esteem. I too have a similar background. I know what it's like to be betrayed continually by those who are supposed to have your back. And I'd like to shorten your learning curve so that you could be happier and more peaceful. I grew up not trusting my parents. That is accurate, but it also is an understatement. Now, I don't know about you. I'm a sci-fi geek, and so I love, what's it called? Steampunk. And part of steampunk was the posh culture, or the illusion of the posh culture typified by H.G. Wells, in which understatement was sort of a thing. And it can be fun, and it can be classy sounding, but we have to be honest with ourselves. We have to be ghastly Americans. We have to be vulgar. We grew up not trusting our parents. That's probably just the tip of the iceberg. If we grew up not trusting our parents, it's because they broke our trust. And often, more than once. There is something called PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder. But there's also something called CPTSD, which is complex post-traumatic stress disorder. If PTSD is one traumatic thing happening, CPTSD is a series of traumatic things happening, well, that's weird, for a very long period of time, often unpredictably, which is so very difficult. Don't let anyone tell you, oh, just get over it. That is not helpful. So I too have had a wicked stepfather, and I too have jumped at the sounds that I might hear. So I'm right there with you. Now, I've got some good news and some bad news. We'll start with the bad news. So on our computers, there's a reset button, and it's in our Windows, and it helps us to reset to a previous configuration on our computer, which is cool. We don't have that in our bodies. See, PTSD is not psychological, it's physiological, and it has psychological ramifications, but it is a physiological situation. Trauma changes the central nervous system. Now, in Japan, there's a form of artwork where you take a ceramic object that has been broken and you fill the cracks in with gold, and it's very, very beautiful, and it reminds us of the Zen notion of perfectly imperfect. So, and although it is very, very beautiful, no one's going to mistake it for pristine and uninjured. I'm a boy, and in boy culture, there's the idea that you should always date someone who's younger than you. That never spoke to me, because I'm a sapiosexual and I like people's minds. And I want someone's mind who has been around the block a time or two and who is insightful. Idealism is cute, but you're going to want someone who's insightful. So our flaws increase our value to the human race. Yes, it might make us more vulnerable, but it also makes us more insightful. It makes us more compassionate. It helps us to understand that life is complicated. There are no simple answers, and to have empathy towards others. So, when you wrote of the wrenching in your chest and the rush of adrenaline, this is a classic trauma response. Now, allow me to take a moment to insult your intelligence. If you don't have a psychiatrist or a psychologist, it may be useful to work with one. But, and this is super important, hear me now, believe me later, not all mental health professionals are created equal. Find one who specializes in adult survivors of child abuse. Not someone who took a 3-day seminar. Someone whose entire career is built around this. Whose continuing education is built around this. Someone who's like a week older than God. Get you a salty dog, regardless of gender. Get you someone who has been around the block a time or two. If you don't have someone, Google PCRM, and let me go over here real quick. Here we go. Un momento. Copy. Okay, so pcrm.org. Find a doctor. You can Google this. This is nonprofit. It's totally free. They will help you find an MD or a PhD whose specialty is adult survivors of child abuse, and especially those whose continuing education has focused on peer-reviewed studies exploring how nutrition and gut health and systemic inflammation could exacerbate your condition. You want to find people whose specialty is making your healing as easy and swift as possible. I put this in bigger capital letters because I'm funny that way. There we go. I guess my question is, will something like this pass? And the answer is yes and no. No, because trauma changes our body, as I mentioned a few minutes ago. Yes, because if you do this right, you will get better and better and better at coping with it. So it's like that illustration we talked about from Japanese culture where they take a broken vessel and they patch it up with gold, and it's quite beautiful and quite meaningful. It's not exactly the same. Some would say it's better. Some wouldn't. You can't please everybody. You won't be exactly who you were before you encountered abusive caregivers. But you can become very good at coping, which is useful, which is very useful. Forgive me if this sounds prejudiced. There's a place in my heart for everybody. But if there's an area in my life where I seek improvement, I want to get advice from someone who's had difficulties in that area and who's overcome them. Because if I seek advice from someone who's never had any struggles, their advice is going to have the depth of cellophane. I want someone who's been around the block a time or two. I hope you get that. So you can get good at coping. And the people in your life who don't get that and who kind of judge you, you're better off without them. There are people out there who are intelligent and tender-hearted and are waiting to meet you and love you and respect you and value you. It's happening more often. I've been looking at it like it's just feelings coming up from when I was younger that I've avoided. So this is better than nothing. This is better than reaching for an illicit substance. But when we receive the so-called wisdom of meditation masters, we have to remember, number one, that these are translations of translations of translations of translations. Number two, for people for whom English is seldom their first language. Number three, that all complex animals on this planet have evolved to think symbolically, which means a substantial proportion of human communication is figurative. So the old saw, like, oh, it's just a thought, is a useful thumbnail or dog-ear way of remembering a teaching. But as a one-liner, it can do more harm than good. So let's explore this. When something comes up, this is something to jot down so you can bring it to your next session with the professional that you're working with. A good meditation teacher is a lovely thing, but it's no substitute for someone who's spent their entire professional life dealing with that one problem. In the Hebrew scriptures, it is written that wisdom is found with many counselors. So it's great to have a meditation teacher, but it's also good to have a psychiatrist or a psychologist who can really get in there with you. There is a book written by the psychologist Dr. Tom Hartman. It's called Walking Your Blues Away. It's a lovely read. You can acquire it on Amazon. And we will explore the neuroscience, how the neuroscience of meditation affects CPTSD, and how it can be applied to walking meditation, which is wonderful for CPTSD. In just a moment or two. I've just been sitting with it until it passes, but it's extremely uncomfortable. Yes, it's supposed to be uncomfortable. We evolved panic to get us on our feet and running in the opposite direction as the perceived threat. Our ancestors, our distant ancestors who did not have this capacity, did not live long enough to pass on their genetic material. We are the descendants of twitchy motherfuckers. So the fact that this is uncomfortable is good because it's prompting you to do something about it. So what I'd like to do is twofold. First, what I'd like to do is to explore, to question the assumptions that you were taught about meditation through the lens of neuroscience. And then I wish to apply it to walking meditation. So let's jump right in. Now, if the assumptions you were taught are incompatible with neuroscience, that is not an indictment on you. It's an indictment on societal norms and the teachers you've encountered, but not an indictment on you. The incompetence of others is not your fault. So let's dig in. So this is a side view of the human brain. This is the back and this is the front. This is the forehead area right here. So just behind the forehead, you got a hunk of meat that some people call the anterior cingulate gyrus. And in it, there are many structures, such as the medial anterior cingulate gyrus and the dorsolateral anterior cingulate gyrus. And when we rely upon such structures to actively concentrate or actively analyze, in the short term, functional magnetic resonance imaging studies have shown that our blood collects at our amygdala, this squishy thing right here, that functions as the seat of both aggression and anxiety, located in the metaphoric dungeon of our limbic system. In the long term, if we persist in overusing our prefrontal cortex, then we run the risk of presenting with symptoms of depression. Now, I don't know about you. Maybe you're tougher than me. I'm a big wussy thing. I don't require more terror or rage or despair in my life. So I don't want to fall into this trap. How about you? But here's some good news. Due to a happy accident of evolution, we have an entire portion of our central nervous system that has evolved specifically to help us deal with this stuff. It's called the autonomic nervous system. The first facet is called the sympathetic nervous system. It's ensconced within the thoracic or the rib cage region of our spinal cord. It has evolved to help us to perceive vulnerably, passively, viscerally, and randomly. Let that sink in. Every time we breathe in, we are already wired to notice shit. To notice sights, sounds, sensations, flavors, scents, and the like. To notice emotions, intentions, thoughts, memories, and imaginings. Despite the fantasies of science fiction, we are not computers. We are not digital. We are analog. We have evolved to perceive and think in spectrums. Thus, we can perceive everything from the external to the internal, from the physical to the mental, from the pleasurable to the painful, from the interesting to the boring, from the glorious to the grotesque. Now that could sound overwhelming, so here's the good news. Just as every time we inhale, we're wired to access our sympathetic nervous system, every time we exhale, we're wired to access our parasympathetic nervous system, which is ensconced within both the lower lumbar region of our spinal cord as well as the tippy top of the thoracic region, sometimes described as the, I have trouble pronouncing this, sometimes described as the reticular activation system, or I like to call it brainstem, because let's face it, this kind of looks like a mushroom, doesn't it? So no matter what you call it, whether you call it reticular activation system, brainstem, or Fred and Ethel, whatever you call it, this parasympathetic nervous system has evolved to support both physical relaxation as well as mental release. Now, no one is born, takes one breath, and is done with breathing. No. For the entirety of our life, we're breathing in and out hundreds and thousands of times. And simultaneously, we are perceiving and releasing, at least potentially, hundreds and thousands of times. Now, I say potentially, because this big old brain of ours is kind of like Urkel. Clever, means well, but clumsy as hell. Can I do that? So, what happens is we stumble and trip and undermine the efficacy of our sympathetic and parasympathetic nervous systems. But there's good news. Remember, our Urkel of a brain is clever. And if we ask it to silently and mentally recite the demonstrative pronoun this during every inhalation, it'll find itself cooperating with the sympathetic nervous system. And when we ask our Urkel of a brain to silently and mentally recite the one-syllable verb ease during each exhalation, we will find that it is inadvertently cooperating with our parasympathetic nervous system. The great irony of meditation, it is the art of learning how to cooperate with the healing features of our autonomic nervous system. Remember how I told you when we rely on our prefrontal cortex, bad things happen? It's great to use it for what it was evolved to do, which is like calculation. Awesome. Analysis. Great. Comparison. Awesome. But it did not evolve as a substitute for the autonomic nervous system. The autonomic nervous system is huge. Look at the... No, so here's the cool thing. When instead of relying upon the structures of our prefrontal cortex to actively analyze and actively concentrate, when instead of doing that, we rely upon our sympathetic and parasympathetic nervous system, then this blood mass we talked about shifts to this thing that looks kind of like a catcher's mitt. The big kids call it the anterior cingulate gyrus. It functions as the hub of our mirror neurons, the seat of empathy and compassion and love. This is why the greatest Dzogchen Lamas of Tibet have insisted that the highest love is spontaneous and uncontrived. Now that we know how meditation works, we can apply it to walking meditation. You see, what trauma is an event that our brain is treating as a present experience. It hasn't, and you really can't see this yet, it hasn't been tucked into the hippocampus yet. It hasn't entered into the hippocampus and gone into long-term storage. The brain is treating it as a present moment experience. That is the essence of trauma. Here's the cool thing, though. Just by briskly walking, taking loping steps, legs swinging, arms swinging, eyes noticing what's going on around you so you don't step in a piece of doggy doo or step into traffic. All these things function to sort of like massage your hippocampus and help your brain to process that which it has failed to process due to no fault of its own. So as we walk, we continue with the same recitation. As we breathe in, we silently and mentally recite this. As we breathe out, we silently and mentally recite ease. We can experience the full spectrum. We can experience the external, the internal, the physical, the mental, the pleasurable, the painful, the interesting, the boring, the glorious, and the grotesque. If you need to start off gradually, that's fine. You can start out with 5 minutes every 12 hours, bump that up to 10 minutes every 12 hours, then bump it up to 15 minutes every 12 hours, bump that up to 20 minutes every 12 hours, bump that up to 25 minutes every 12 hours. Persist with it, and it will help you to cope with what comes up. There is a sect of Zen monks in China whose entire focus is walking or running meditation. So there are times when it's appropriate to park your tuchus on a cushion. That's fine. But there's times when you are agitated, and your job is not to repress that agitation, but to put it to work. We evolved a panic response to save our lives, not to torment us. Can you imagine two of our distant ancestors having climbed out of the trees and began exploring the plains of the Serengeti, and both hear a noise, and one bolts and the other mocks and calls the other one a coward, assuming they had language, which they didn't. That one who was pointing and laughing at the coward who's fleeing got eaten for lunch. So when we feel that rush of adrenaline, put it to work with brisk walking meditation. And here's a quick pro tip. When you are metaphorically in it, you might not actually practice pedestrian safety. You might get lost. You might walk into traffic. So here's the trick. Here's the pro tip. Stay on your block and just do laps around that block over and over and over and over again. That's fine. It's very difficult to get, crushed by a steamroller when you're on your block. It's very difficult to get lost when you're on your block. This will really, really help. Personally, I've been walking the same street for about, 2016? This is 2008 years, I think. 8, 9, 10. Yeah, 8 years. So I've been walking back and forth the same street. It's about a half-mile street, back and forth for 8 years. So I know every dog and its human. Because I got a lot of shit to work through. Especially at Hanukkah or Christmas. Oy vey. That's around my birthday, but super around Christmas. That's a difficult time. Doing this hasn't erased my past, but it's helped me to deal with it. And it could help you deal with it as well. I do look forward to practicing with you together as a team after approximately 30 seconds of housekeeping. This is, This is Lama Jigme Gyatso of the Buddha Joy Meditation School. For more than 30 years, I spent about 8 hours a day, almost every day, studying, practicing, mastering, and reverse engineering the teachings and techniques of each sect of Buddhism so that you would not have to. Welcome, my friends, to Meditate Like a Jedi, which is made possible due to the generosity of viewers just like you. Let me put the brakes on this bad boy so it stops jiggling about. Just as a sprinter doesn't get out of their car, walk to the track, and start running, they warm up first. We're going to warm up. We're going to warm up by contemplating loving kindness. We're going to warm up by contemplating impermanence. And then we're going to go for it. We might do one lap. We might do multiple laps. So let's begin by bringing the 4 bases of mindfulness. The 4 bases of mindfulness, the circumstantial, the physical, the interpersonal, and the mental. Let us bring the 4 bases of mindfulness into the path of both stress and loving kindness. Please chant with me. Since we are not alone in our mental frustrations, we could also long that others' mental needs also be met. So as we breathe in, we could silently and mentally recite the word wise. And as we breathe out, we could silently and mentally and passively recite the word all. And we're just wishing a great wisdom for all beings. It's not our job to actively visualize or believe or emote or do magic. We're just playing with words in an effort to exercise the neural pathways responsible for empathy. So let's do this together. Let's practice this together as a team for 4 rounds, assuming that a round is simply 1 inhalation followed by 1 exhalation. And let's count those 4 rounds by advancing the tip of our left thumb during each inhalation upon the creases and tip of our left little finger. Together, let us practice right now. Since we are not alone in our interpersonal frustrations, we could also long that others' interpersonal needs also be met. So let us wish love for all beings. And let us count these next 4 rounds upon our left ring finger. So what we're doing is we're taking our own greed for healthy relationships and transforming it into universal love, which is very cool. Since we are not alone in our physical frustrations, we could also long that others' physical needs also be met. Now let us count the next 4 rounds upon our left middle finger. Since we are not alone in our circumstantial frustrations, we could also long that other circumstantial needs also be met. We're using the word boon as a synonym for good fortune. Let us count this next 4 rounds upon our left index finger. Now let us bring again the 4 bases of mindfulness, this time into the path of both impermanence and not-self. Not-self simply means that as we relax into our exhalation, that which we noticed during our previous inhalation could feel less graspable, could feel less permanent, could feel less defining. That's all. Easy peasy lemon squeezy. Observing the coming and going of appearing circumstantial phenomena helps us to see that ever-changing one and all the rest nothing permanent to grasp. We're using the word lots as a synonym for circumstances. So here's something I think it's kind of cool. We've just learned how we can count 16 rounds on our left hand, which is great. On our right hand, we can count sets. So we've counted our first set of 16 rounds. And now we can begin working on our second set of 16 rounds. Do you have to do this? No. Could it feel beneficial? Yes. Will it feel ungainly the first time you do it? Everything does. But persist with it once every 12 hours or so, and then within a week or two, it can feel like you've always been doing it. We're using melts as a metaphor of impermanence. And the funny thing is, we don't have to believe in impermanence. Every time we breathe out, we're experiencing the impermanence of the previous inhalation. How cool is that? Observing the coming and going of sensual physical phenomena helps us to feel that ever-changing one and all there is nothing permanent to grasp. This is an excellent time to remind you we do not need to twist our legs into a pretzel. We do not need to force our shins to rest upon each other. If we sit comfortably, gravity will do the work for us. Respecting that our knees are just hinge joints, remembering that our hips are ball joints, gravity will gently do the work for us. Remember also that it's most ergonomically sound just to rest your hands in your lap, even if you're doing crease counting. We're using the word forms as a synonym for body. Or I should say bodies in this case, the plural. Observing the coming and going of resounding interpersonal phenomena helps us to hear that ever-changing one and all the rest nothing permanent to grasp. We're using feels as a synonym for experience of the interpersonal. Perceiving the coming and going of loose and mental phenomena helps us to clearly perceive that ever-changing one and all there is nothing permanent to grasp. In Southeast Asia, conical towers are often used to symbolize the enlightened mind. The Buddha never taught that; it's simply a cultural affectation. Now let us bring whatever we spontaneously notice into the path of awareness and letting go. And we're going to use the techniques we already discussed during the opening lesson. Allow me to remind you, however, that during each inhalation we are already wired to generate a vertical traction between our tush and our head, and that during each exhalation that traction is already designed or evolved to relax. Let us seal this morning's practice by percussively chanting loving wishes for universal enlightenment and well-being. May all minds clear yet and permanent be as enlightened as a Buddha's mind. May all relationships resounding yet impermanent be as loving as a Buddha's speech. May all bodies sensual yet impermanent be as beautifully healthy as a real or imagined Deva's form. May all circumstances appearing yet impermanent be as safe and abundant as a real or imagined Devi's land. If you feel that I have earned it, you could give this live stream a thumbs up. You could even help support this channel. In approximately 9 2/3 hours, I would very much like to return to lead today's evening meditation class and group practice. And if you are as geeky as me, may the Force be with you always.